Hello, Changemaker.
Welcome to the Innovation Room.
A place for business leaders,
Change agents and change champions.
anyone who wants to know where digital transformation is taking us,
A place that sparks ideas.
and explores what's really possible with software and technology.
Ready?
Let's see what's happening.
Strategy is no longer about protecting the core, as the business is constantly in flux, shifting millimeters or miles. It is a constant flow between technology innovations, stakeholder demands, protecting our planet, and business priorities. But where should the focus for a strategy lie? Is it the commercial, customer, technology, or society? And what sort of skills do we need to unlearn or learn as business leaders to be able to develop and implement a strategy which is fit for the future, that is way more unclear than we have ever experienced? My guest today is a veteran technologist turned into a futurist. His focus now is on potential radical transformations in society and humanity. Transformation enabled by accelerating technological disruption and mediated by social and political reaction. I am Somayeh, CEO of Geeks, and it's my absolute pleasure to welcome back David Wood, Chair of London Futurist, to the Innovation Room. Hi David, welcome back to the Innovation Room. I would still want you to do a quick introduction for the people who might not have listened to your previous episode, venturing into the uncharted territory of coexisting with AI, and then we carry on. But thank you for coming back to the Innovation Room.
It's a great pleasure to be back. A little bit about myself. I chair London Futurists. I've done so now for 15 years. It's to help people systematically think through some of the possibilities about the future, which aren't just simple extensions of what's already happening, but disruptions, surprises, combinations. So you can think creatively and constructively about these things. That's my firm belief. Rather than just being a victim of the future, we can actually take part in steering these remarkable future possibilities.
Do you want to choose a different person this time for bringing with yourself to the Innovation Room? Alive or dead, fiction or real?
I recently finished a wonderful book on the Scout mindset by Julia Galef. So Julia has a background in the rationality movement in terms of it's important to help us all to be more rational about our decisions. But it was her observation that a lot of the time, even though we know the principles of rationality, we aren't very good at applying them. We are often willfully deceiving ourselves. We prefer to keep on finding evidence in favor of the causes we already champion, rather than truly seeking dispassionately to find the wider and bigger picture. So her comparison is between soldiers who try to fight a cause, try to defend the position, and scouts who are just trying to see what is there. And if you don't know the landscape properly, you may charge with all your might and all your determination and all your will, but if you're going in a false direction, that won't help you very much. So Julia has lots of practical tips on how we can be more scout-like instead of urging us to continue to ask the question, may I believe this? Or must I believe this? Which is what we often bring in because we want something to be true or we want something to be false. She says her question is much more, what should we believe in terms of not being directionally motivated, but accuracy motivated?
That sounds fascinating. Does she talk about why we are more soldiers than scouts?
She indeed does. And a lot of the time it has been good for us to be a little bit deceived about the reality we are in. And there's a whole bunch of psychologists who claim to have proven it's better to be optimistic rather than being realistic. That if we are happy, rah, 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 if you fake it until you make it, that's how you're going to make it. But Julia reviews a lot of this research a bit more dispassionately, a bit more carefully. And it's her argument, yeah, of course we must be constructive. Of course we must look for good possibilities, but we must not deceive ourselves with our happy talk or with our blind spots, which we sometimes adopt rather too
Mm.
much. So historically, that made sense. And in smaller evolutionary bands, when we were on the African savannah in small groups, it probably was the right balance that we've ended up with for that
Mm.
time. But now, when we're facing a more complicated world with larger pressures, where we need to think about exponential change and disruptions, it's more important to set aside some of these older evolutionary instincts, just as we must step aside from the sweet tooth that evolution gave us, which on the whole was useful in the past, that we would prioritize eating fruit when we found it because we might not find it again. But nowadays, when we're in the supermarket and we see lots of lovely cakes, our instinct is to buy them all. And we have to say, hang on, evolution, you are misleading me towards diabetes. No, I don't want that anymore. In the similar way, some of the soldier mindset had a good purpose in the past, but we are now in a different world, and it's time to take charge of our future rather than just letting evolution do that.
It really, I think, is relevant today with the changes, the fast changes of the technology, and the specifically AI and the generative AI advancement in the past couple of months, that is kind of shaking the business world massively, if not the whole world. So how would you bring it into that concept of, with the world changing so fast, with technologies coming up really fast, how, what does a good strategy mean anymore if we have to keep thinking about things differently, and how fast businesses need to review, or how often what's the good frequency of reviewing their business strategy, considering they shouldn't be deceived with certain vibes or hypes.
Well, we deceive ourselves often. When we hear some report, we sometimes think to ourselves, oh, I hope that's true. That's going to be great news. Or when we hear another report, we think to ourselves, oh, I hope that's not true. That would be bad news. Let me find evidence as to why I don't need to pay attention to that. But in both cases, if the pace of change really is increasing, then we ought to be a little bit more careful about jumping to these conclusions,
Mm.
because there may be different opportunities than the ones we first had in mind. If we commit to a 5 year strategy, which used to be good advice, figure out where you want to go and don't deviate from that, and then the world throws different things in our direction. If we just look for evidence that maybe our original 5 year strategy is still all right, and we shut out all the evidence that it's wrong, but we pick the few things that might be in its favor, then again, it's a likelihood that we're going to end up far short of our true potential. So we do
Mm.
need to review. And let's be clear, the pace of change, I personally observe to be rapidly increasing. Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question. Like, because of what you do and being a futurist, like it's the core of what you do is to predict what kind of scenarios might happen. So what have you seen that you as evidence that the pace of change is increasing?
So why do things change? They change because of people applying intelligence, broad intelligence, not just rational intelligence, but creative intelligence and emotional intelligence and so forth. So the more intelligence we can apply, the more possibilities there are for doing things differently. Well, now we have other sources of intelligence. We have AI, which is stands for artificial intelligence. And you can debate whether it's true intelligence and the same sort of intelligence that's going on inside human minds, but there are at least some of the same attributes there. And each time there is an advance in one of these AI systems, it allows itself to be applied to help create other AI systems or other solutions. So medicine is on the point of being turned upside down by AI in a variety of ways. The long, painful process to discover and then validate drugs, a process which costs millions of pounds often, a process which involves huge percentage of all drugs being rejected before they are finally applied through what's called phase 1, phase 2 and phase 3 trials and then commercially released. That could be speeded up significantly by the application of AI. And there's three different ways, in fact. So I won't go into all of that, but there are at
Mhm.
least three different ways in which people believe AI could reverse the historical trend of drugs taking longer and longer to be discovered and released. So
Mm.
that's just one way. It's the more tools that are available and the more intelligence that can be applied, the more likelihood there is to change. And I've emphasized their artificial intelligence, but let's also be clear, human intelligence is being applied to these problems as never before because more people in the world than ever before, and the average level of education is higher than ever before, and more people can access up-to-date information on YouTube or via podcasts, such as the very one we're doing now, which is
Yes.
great, but it's not the only one by any means. And there is an enormous variety of things. So when you and I were young, we wanted to look something up. We had to wait until the following morning when the library opened. We had to go to the library and painstakingly search through books manually, hoping there might be a reference to a term in the index. Now you just type it into your phone any time of the day or night and you get so much more information.
Or just ask, or you just ask ChatGPT and it just connects different books and gives you, because it
Exactly
does
so.
know all the books. So that's fascinating. But what are your thoughts around this speed of the pace of change? I don't know if I'm using the right words, but is it exponential or is it linear? It's not linear. What you're explaining is not linear. It sounds exponential. Is it exponential?
Things happen exponentially in mathematics when the rate of change is proportional to how much you've already got. So if the rate of change is the same, independent of how much you've already got, then it's linear, it keeps going.
Mm-hmm.
But the higher up the curve you are, if that changes the direction to go higher and higher, that's mathematically an exponential. Now, I don't know that it's truly going to fit this in a curve, but I do believe that there are more possibilities for change than before. And so the result is that what formerly we thought might take 2 decades may just happen in 2 years. That was the answer somebody gave to me in a London Futurist event just a few days ago. We asked him, the audience member asked him, what you think is going to happen in the next 2 decades. And his answer, this was Pavel Pachniewski, an AI researcher. His answer was, the next 2 decades is going to happen in the next 2 years. And that sounds stupid, but what he means is what we formerly thought might take 2 decades is now happening in
Mm.
such a short pace of time. Another example of this was given by Ray Kurzweil a while ago. He looked at a very significant breakthrough in biology, which was the ability to sequence the human genome and make sense of all of it. And
Mm.
from about the middle 1990s, people thought, rather than just interpreting a few small parts of the human genome, perhaps we could sequence the whole lot of it. And people did a calculation and said, if we keep going at the pace we're going to go now, it's going to take centuries.
Mhm.
But Ray Kurzweil and others said, well, we're going to go faster and faster. And roughly every 18 months, they were able to go twice as fast with the pace. And so even if they were 7 years in and they'd only done 5%, some people were saying it's going to take, well, we've taken 7 years to go 5%. It's going to take uh, another century at least to finish. But no, because it kept on doubling, then it was just another 5 years or so before the project was essentially finished. Again, what previously we thought would take centuries can happen within decades.
I was listening to one of your latest podcasts on the London Futures podcast when you were talking to one of the member of the House of Lords, who I got very excited to learn that there is such an expert in the politics, because most of the time you talk to politicians and you feel like they're so don't understand technology, how they're going to regulate it, how they're going to like pass laws to protect the society and so on and so forth. But his understanding was really, really at the edge, really good, really impressive. But what he said was very interesting in a sense of prior to ChatGPT vibe, there were a handful of MPs who would turn up to the sessions that he would be running to talk about AI and the impact of it on the government projects and the society and things like that. And then since then, is like so many more of them are interested to learn what's happening, and I think that impacts the pace of change as well, because most of the time governments are the reason things are slower in happening and regulation is slower. So if that aspect of the change is sped up, then that's another impact.
Exactly so. I mean, we're talking about Tim Clement Jones, who is the member of the House of Lords who has co-chaired since I think 2015 the all-party parliamentary group on AI. I've been
Mhm.
to many of his events over the years, and there's always been some good talk there, but most of the good talk has come not from members of Parliament, either the House of Lords or the House of Commons. It has tended to come from other invited experts. But now the thing is turning because members of Parliament are hearing from their constituents. They're worried
Mhm.
about jobs. They thought they were safe because they were in a graphics design role, and surely computers are not going to be able to do graphic design. Sure, you need the wonderful human vision, the
Mhm.
mystical what spark, whatever it is. And now we see Mid-Journey, DALI jumping forwards every few weeks a new release which has more capabilities. So
Yeah.
people who previously thought they would be safe from technology impacting their job, journalists, other creative writers too, are now turning up to the MP's constituencies up and down the land and saying, what's going to be done? And to their credit, most of the MPs aren't coming up with their party political ideology and say, well, I'm a conservative, therefore I believe blah, 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 or I'm a Labour Party member, or I'm a Scottish nationalist, therefore we need the Scottish national AI. They're not saying that on the whole. When they reflect, they realize there's something bigger going on here that doesn't easily fit in
Mm.
preconceived party political ideologies. And so many of them are coming with a fairly open mind to these sessions now, saying, let's think about this together. And the one response is there is more money being made available. Maybe not as much in Britain as in some other countries, but there is some more money being applied to a whole range of startups that seek either to develop more AI or very practically seek to apply AI in new fields right across the board of industry.
That takes us to the really interesting point about advancement of technology, because taking technology aside, the challenge of creating a good business strategy was always creating the balance between the different things that are naturally in tension with each other, like short-term goals versus long-term goals, employee happiness versus customer happiness, the um, I don't know, profit versus the environment and the planet. Um, I think technology has amplified these tensions and has added to these tensions. So all of them are becoming more and more complex and more sometimes polarized. What's possible? What do we do? So the references you make, like the creative industry is panicking about, because we all I thought like AI is not gonna, it's gonna take a long time for the AI to become creative. But then all of a sudden you see it's easier for AI, it seems, to be creative than not be creative. And then that side of added tension makes it more difficult to create a strategy as a business. What do you take into account, and what is your advice, or where are you seeing these tensions moving towards as we go to the near future and a longer future? How are you seeing that they are going to change, or are they going to change, and what's the best way to go about them?
So perhaps the role of specialists is going to diminish, and perhaps the role of what we might call polymaths or
Mm,
polyskilled people is going to grow. I'm not against specialists, but I'm aware that whatever people have been specializing in probably needs to be combined more often with new sets of insights and skills. So, two areas I particularly think are going to grow in importance are understanding regulations and managing regulations, anticipating regulations and steering regulations. So, there's all of that. And secondly, trust. And
mhm,
trust's always been important to business, but I think it's going to be much more important in the near future than it has been in the past. Brands have always realized they are at risk if they allow their reputation for trust to be undermined, but people as a whole are more nervous now. They're more fearful about some of the bad things that technology might do. They see that some high tech companies are making enormous profits. They are some of the wealthiest companies in the world. They see that some of these high tech companies seem to be ignoring politicians and the democratic viewpoint. They are pursuing their own agenda. Not entirely, but there are definitely elements of that. So some of my former colleagues from the software industry, decades ago, in fact, are contacting me and saying, David, can't we do something to rein in these tech companies? There is a techlash, as it's called, a
Mm.
backlash against technology companies. And even though there are many highly well motivated people in big tech, there are other forces at work which may lead them sometimes to rush to the release of product.
Mhm.
Arguably, Microsoft have rushed out their new version of Bing. I think it's
Mhm.
called Sydney, in part because they see an opportunity to overtake Google. They
Mhm.
thought their chat system that they used from OpenAI,
Yeah.
OpenAI and Microsoft have a close partnership. They thought they gave them
Yeah.
an opportunity. So they are rushing, arguably, to deliver this to customers before Google gets in there with its own equivalent, Bard or whatever it's
Yeah.
called. And so they may be cutting corners. And again, members of the public, politicians, and others may say, hang on, and there may be this bigger techlash. So to counteract that, I think companies need to raise up the focus on trust, and maybe they each need to have a chief trust officer. Then that might sound a bit corny, but something like that. So in the past, what distinguished successful tech companies from unsuccessful ones in the past, in part, was how much focus they put on design and usability. And successful tech companies had powerful, high ranking influence from design specialists. I think differently in the near future, the focus will be design's still important, but the new focus is going to be on trust. So,
Mm.
trust, navigating the regulatory and political landscape are two new sorts of skills. And none of us have time to go and do a 4 year degree course in regulations or in trust. It might be nice, but we don't. So we're going to have to become polymaths. We're going to have to
Mm.
learn about some of these broader skills in a hurry.
And what are the best ways? What are the best ways? Because I know you do wonderful stuff in the London Futurist space. I would say, like the events you run, and also the you have, I forgot the name. You've got this space when you put the materials that people can use, and I've checked it. There are really really good materials, but also if there is anything else, or there is any other way that you would advise that it would be good for the business leaders to educate themselves about how to go about reviewing their strategy in light of what is happening in the world.
The project you're referring to, I think, is Vital Syllabus. There
That's
are
it. Yeah.
24 pages there of material covering 24 areas. Number one is learning how to learn. That is, how can we more quickly learn the new stuff without needing to go on 4 year degree courses? How can we unlearn as well as to learn? And I think I put something in there from Julia Galiff.
Hmm.
Actually, I've got myself an action item to put something in there from Julia Galiff. I'm not sure I've actually got around and done that yet, but maybe by the time this episode is online, I'll have remedied that. So,
Cool.
section one is learning how to learn. Section two is more about communications, which is not just listening, but it's also how do we share our messages with new audiences and so on. It goes through 24 topics, I think, ending
Mm.
with 24 ultimate futures.
Mm.
So, how do we learn? How do we pick up these new skills? Of course, in part, it's by finding online resources, and that's important. But it's also significantly influenced by the people we spend time with. So, finding the right people to spend some time with is a key skill in life. Now, this may sound a bit mercenary because, of course, we all love our friends and our colleagues and we wouldn't change them for the world. But maybe we'd have to think carefully. This group of people who helped me in the past, they brought me to a certain level, they're no longer quite the experts or the people who are still pushing me to in the direction I need to go in this new world or for this new direction. So you have to manage ourselves. So we have to work as hard on ourselves as we do on our career. We have to work as hard on our collaborations as we do. So we spend time with the people who are going to remind us in various ways, not necessarily by what they explicitly say, but what they implicitly do. They remind us of the higher possibilities to which we would like to commit ourselves.
It's really interesting you mentioned that. I was in a business retreat with some female founders around Europe on edtech, and they asked me, like, everybody was sharing, like, what have you learned from years of being founders and CEOs, and what advice would you give? And as everybody was going around and trying to pick a gem from their from their bag, I my answer was like, the business group you're in. That's like, it's so valuable to, like, the people you surround yourself, your advisors, the people you collaborate with. They make a huge difference in where you end up in business and life, obviously. But I 100% agree with what you say, and I have seen it firsthand. When people you spend time with would make a totally different difference in where you end up. And it's, as you say, it's going to become more and more important and vital as the world is changing faster, definitely.
So we'll end up not just being individual polymaths with all the knowledge of all
Collective.
these. It's more of a collective polymath that
Yeah,
we will
100%.
each bring a variety of things. We're not
Mm.
just, we shouldn't just be typecast. So this is the person who understands maths and he doesn't understand anything else. We shouldn't be like that. But the whole will be much bigger than the sum of the parts if we get that combination right.
I think so, and I think it's so much also more important. If you go back to the strategy designing and reviewing the strategy, it becomes so much more important in who do you work with to review your strategy and build your strategy. Is it just your traditional people that you would do it with, or do you need other people involved? I was in another business group session recently, where we had a behavioral scientist talking to us about the behavioral impact of what's happening in the world, and how do you address things with, like, trust with your customers and with your employees the same. And I think, like, having somebody who understand that side of things on helping to build their strategies as important. And obviously you have to have technologists. I'm a bit biased about that, but you cannot build a business strategy without having technologists around you who understand what's
Yes.
happening in the world. And I might add, you need a futurist to tell you what are the possible scenarios. So 100% I agree with the collective intelligence that is needed.
Well, just let's reflect on strategy for a minute. Sometimes we summarize strategic reviews through the four letters SWOT. You look
Hmm.
at strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So the strengths and weaknesses refer to your own self or your own organization. The opportunities and threats are in the environment, things that maybe weren't there before. The futurist brings a third column into things. It's not just yourself, it's not just the spatial environment, as it were, it's the time environment as well, and saying, well,
Mm.
there's going to be a future threat here or a future opportunity.
Opportunity.
And the futurist is there to suggest, considering how you might change your strategy if some of these threats or opportunities materialize.
I can't. It's hard to stop when we talk about future and what's happening, and when we have you in the room. Is there any last piece of advice for business leaders when they are reviewing their strategies, in line of the advancement of technology and the pace of change and what's happening in the near future?
Well, I'll refer back to Julia Galef, the person I mentioned at the beginning. One of her phrases was lean into confusion. When something doesn't seem to make sense, rather than rejecting it and say, well, I don't want to cope with this, I'm going to prefer certainty. Her suggestion, which you'll need to read her book or listen to her audiobook to get the whole story, but there is often true value to be gained by noticing strange things that don't quite fit and disturb your view. So lean into confusion. I might rephrase it also as lean into tension. If there
Mm-hmm.
is turbulence there, don't just say, right, I'm not going there because I prefer a simple life. I prefer certainty. I don't like surprises. That sort of made sense in the past. You could cut out surprises because most of life was relatively predictable. But now that life has many more surprises all the time, we have to be ready to lean into the tension, lean into surprises, which requires bravery, it requires courage, it requires supportive partners who are not going to chew our head off because we dared to admit we were confused, we dared to admit we were surprised. We should be able to say, I don't understand this, but I think it's worth leaning into it. So I
Mm.
think that's a piece of advice I would offer. Whatever people think AI might do in the next 5 years, it's probably going to do more. It's probably going to be an even bigger change. It won't necessarily do everything that you read about in science fiction because a lot of that isn't well grounded, but there will increasingly be software that is emotionally intelligent, that is able to understand our emotions and able to change its behavior depending on how we express ourselves or pick up emotional cues from us. So I expect software to become increasingly emotionally intelligent. I expect at least some software to be increasingly compassionate, working in care industries as well, as therapists,
Mhm.
possibly as massage therapists, possibly as priests or gurus, offering not just rational words, but the kind of soul to soul. It seems, so there probably isn't a soul there in an AI, but it will seem that they are speaking to us profoundly. And people are already
Mm.
having their lives changed from conversations with Chat GPT. It's making them realize
Yes.
things. So it's a bit like when people pray a lot of the time, they're probably just talking to themselves, but they can have deep realizations in that
Hmm.
prayer. So as they talk to Chat GPT, the remarkable things that Chat GPT feeds back to them can already cause them to reorient their lives, hopefully for the better. We can't be
Hmm.
sure always. So expect AI to be more powerful. And if that's confusing, if that's frightening, lean into it. Find out more. Don't deny it.
Brilliant, David. Lovely, lovely, lovely piece of advice. Thank you for joining us again in the innovation room, and thank you for opening up the series. I am planning to bring some of those people who have leaned in as a case study, and I think that would be really, really interesting for the listeners to see the people who have already done it, and see how do they feel about it, how did they deal with the confusion and not knowing, and experimenting, but also creating a lot of value and finding the way. So for the listeners, if you haven't subscribed to the innovation room, please do, so you don't miss out these wonderful guests that we bring in. For you, David, thank you so much, and I look forward to have you back in the innovation room.
I look forward to being back here as well.
Thank you.
Surely next time we talk, the world will have changed.
Thanks for joining us in the Innovation Room.
We hope it sparks some ideas.
Want to learn more about what we do?
Maybe you could even be our next guest.
And spark some ideas yourself.
Find us at Geeks Limited,
And join us again soon.
because real change never stops.